One of the major challenges related to money in politics is the lack of transparency surrounding political party and election finance. Open and transparent funding of political parties and candidates is desirable because it helps to ensure everyone is playing by the rules. This in turn strengthens the integrity of and trust in politics of the general public and political parties in Africa. Transparency helps to level the playing field, exposes the risk of undue influence over politicians, and helps protect against the infiltration of illicit sources of money, thus contributing to the broader fight against corruption. In recent years, there has been considerable progress in the use of information technology to enhance transparency in financing political parties and election campaigns. The rapid digitalization of government agencies, political parties, and citizens alike has significantly expanded the potential to use digital tools to enhance transparency. Use of technology, including digital tools such as websites, programs, and online resources, can help provide solutions towards addressing undeclared, undisclosed, and/or dirty money in politics. When a country builds an online reporting and disclosure system, it becomes part of a wider societal effort to protect and enhance the integrity of politics. In this 8th webinar series on money in politics in Africa, we interrogate the role of ICT in political finance reporting and disclosure.
There was a question, Elizabeth, I saw Lisa Karungia had asked, I think it was going to Dr. Magnus. How are European electoral jurisdictions using information and communication technology to enhance transparency? And I would like, while you're responding to that, also you connect to what can Africa borrow from, how maybe the European jurisdictions are using ICT to enhance transparency in political financing.
So it does vary quite a lot across Europe, and I would say that leading this process right now is Eastern and Southeastern Europe. The former communist countries come out of dictatorships. They are very good at, especially the publication side, to make data available to citizens. There are still ways to go, but they're really good at that. We have in a number of European countries electronic reporting, so that parties submit their reports directly electronically. There's no paper format. And there are in some countries, like Finland, for example, parties submit their financial reports, and when they do that, they become available to the public automatically. So the oversight institution, which happens to be an audit body here, they don't actually do anything. They just sit there, they provide the platform, the parties upload the data, and it becomes available to the public. What's mainly what's mainly lacking in many European countries is the tools for using this data to control its accuracy. And that's not really that the ICT isn't there, it's not that it's not being used to cross-check these financial records with other data that's available, tax records, custom records, an whole host of things. There's a lot that Africa can learn from the European experience, good things, and also a lot of bad things that European countries have done over the years, mistakes that they have learned from. But it then boils down to, we need to have this data available to us. If, as Ellen was talking about, we don't have this information about donations submitted to us, then there's nothing we can do with ICT to make it available. So that needs to be the starting point.
Thank you, Dr. Magnus. I want now to bring Mr. Emmanuel. I know you've this moved around some of the African countries, and I want you to share with us some of the experiences you got from there in terms of how those countries are using ICT, in terms of, have they embraced ICT in terms of enhancing transparent political financing, and maybe if they have not, there are some discussions that some of them are having in order to embrace ICT.
Thank you, moderator. That's an interesting question. My personal observation in terms of the use of ICT across most African countries is that we're pretty much almost at the same level. The difference is really very small. I mean, the difference is just based on access. How many people actually do have access to internet? How many people have access to tools? How many people actually know, in terms of literacy levels, how to use these technology systems here and there. So across the experience we have in Uganda is pretty much close to the experience in Kenya, the experience in Zimbabwe, in West Africa, in Nigeria, or even in Liberia for that matter. So many of the African countries are pretty much at the same or close level in terms of how they have embraced technology. The difference is actually really small, apart from penetration, access, the costs, illiteracy. That's where you see a couple of differences. So what you'd notice is that I think, first of all, technology is still very young within the African context and even globally. And I think many of the democracies in Africa are still young. They're still learning from these mistakes. Many of the democracies are adopting how to embrace technology. It also means the same political parties as well are adopting how to use technology. Perhaps you'll probably notice that many of the political parties are trying to use maybe ICT to register their members, in terms of knowing how many members do we actually have. Maybe you have a sort of database that you can use so that you can be able to sort of reach out to them whenever you're having a campaign or an election, registration of their own political party databases and so forth. Of course, that's where you notice. And of course, there are resources that are required to do that. But you don't think there is anything complicated about their registration databases. Most of them are probably just running on basic Excel. It's really very rare for you to find a political party that has actually adopted, maybe they're having a system and a database that can actually be able to provide infographics about the distribution of their registered voters across the different geopolitical areas, regions or locations. So at the end of the day, aggregation of this data is also quite something that is lacking. And like I want to agree with Dr. Magnus, the thing about technology is that it can't create its own data. There has to be willingness to provide the data, and that data needs to be structured and not just, sitting there. If you look at most of the political parties, or even most websites in Africa, they're rarely updated. You don't have updated information and content on what you can actually use. So the challenges do exist, and yet we also recognize the potential that technology can bring. And I think maybe continuously, as we continue to engage with technology, there's room for improvements, there's room to learn, there's room to make mistakes, there's room to improve on those mistakes, there's room to learn from those who have done a better, maybe, analysis. And I mean, when you look at, for instance, the political parties, look at Kenya, where Ellen is right now. Every time there is a presidential election, it feels like there's a new political party that comes to play within the field. So every time there are always collaborations. There's just no one traditional party. When you look at the traditional parties like KANU and so forth, they pretty much have been phased out. So every time there's a new election, it means every sort of presidential leader of a different political party comes together and, brings these numbers to the table. So you'll see Azimio has its own coalition, the Kwanza party has its own coalition. So even capturing that kind of data, it's quite difficult actually for Kenya, for them to actually tell exactly what numbers they even have as each of these coalitions, because they just got married recently last year, and now they're running a campaign. Everybody's talking about the numbers they have. I think the only thing that is in Kenya is just to represent the registered voters as per the region. So you'll know the biggest majority of voters is maybe the mountain votes, then maybe parts of Kisumu and so forth. So the best they can do is look at the data that is available from Electoral Commission as far as the number of registered voters is concerned, and probably adopt that to inform their sort of context of campaigns and so forth. But also look at our own national registry of databases in Uganda. I mean, during the last elections, all we had to do was to adopt the data that was captured with NIRA, with the National Information Registration Authority, and it actually became an informed the national database for registered voters for the Electoral Commission. You see, I think recently in Nigeria as well, they've just introduced, I was seeing INEC doing registration now for national IDs for citizens, and there's been a huge push for them to actually call on citizens using the national IDs, the NIN numbers, to now register to vote. And I think that's a current campaign that is running on in Nigeria. So when you look at most of the African countries, at least we are fortunate in Uganda that by the time we're doing the national registration, we actually adopted quite a lot of technology in terms of capturing biodata for that particular database. So you remember when you're registering for national IDs, you capture all the biodata, the facial input, the fingerprint input, and all this data that has actually been shared with the election management body, Electoral Commission. I think that's a huge plus because that's clean, credible data that can be used and can also be shared across other government agencies for whatever resources. Now, when you need a passport, they actually use your national identification database to actually generate you a passport. It's the same information. So we've seen technology goes ahead to play a particularly very important role when these processes are going on. But we also recognize the challenges that most African countries, most political parties go on as far as adopting technology and so forth. And I think it's still at its basic level. We're still growing. We still need to learn how to capture this data, how to keep it clean, how to use it, how to improve it, how to secure it, and how do we use that data to actually inform the different engagements that we do across most African democracies. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel. We now go to Ms. Ellen, who wants to explain herself shortly. Dr. Hoffman shared about that technology cannot provide its own data. And we know that in most African countries, most politicians and political parties don't like disclosing any data they have. And we find it very difficult. Even like now, you just testified in Kenya, you cannot even know where is the money coming from, which these candidates are using. So how do you, according to your own opinion, how can African countries and also with support from other world countries that have done enough work in terms of ensuring that political parties be transparent in terms of where they get their money from, and also how they disclose, I mean how they account and also disclose this to the public? How can we support political parties and also candidates themselves to ensure that they are transparent enough in disclosing how much money they have gotten, and also how much money they have spent, and maybe how much money they have retained? How can we support political parties and candidates?
Thank you very much for that question. Yeah, I think it will be difficult to compel, to force political parties to disclose any information if there's no policy or a legal framework that compels them to do that. So what we need, I think, firstly is a good law, a good legal framework, sound policies that compels political parties to do that. So this can be political parties registration first. Once they are registered, part of registration, I think some of the requirements should be that they avail they avail resources or their accounts to the body that is registering them as a requirement. And then they also sign, it could be a code of conduct, it could be an MOU, whatever. That also requires the regulatory body to audit, to check, to scrutinize the accounts or documents of a political party. So if there's no policy, if there's no law, I think it will be very difficult to do that, in my view. So what we need first and foremost is the law and sound policies. Then coming back to the issue of code of conduct, I think that one is very, very important in terms of putting in place sound policies. I think that's one area where political parties can, even the leadership can be forced to abide, to make public declarations of abiding to such things like the code of conduct or the statutory instrument that are provided for by that particular country, in particular on disclosing. If it's a requirement that before renewal of your registration as a political party, you need to publish your audited accounts, let it be. If it's a requirement that every year a political party should avail its annual report, for example, to the public domain, maybe have it published and put on the website, let it be, because those are the things that we want to also scrutinize in terms of making sure that there is a fair level playing ground in terms of the use of finances, the use of resources and money in elections. So we need to compare them, but there's need for a sound law. I also wanted to comment on the issue of regulatory institutions that Magnus also alluded to. That most of the EMBs they don't want to regulate political parties. I think even for my country, Zimbabwe, our electoral commission has also been saying they want a separate institution to deal with that. It comes with a burden that regulatory and political parties, by virtue they are trying to get into power. It's not easy. They have their own behind the scenes challenges, intra-party problems, inter-party challenges. So it's also not easy to regulate. So many countries actually opt for a separate registrar and regulatory body to do that. But again, if it's a commission or an EMB that decides or that agrees to undertake that particular role, then there's need for a truly independent EMB, an independent that is credible, that is respected, that people has confidence in and trusts. Because the other challenges, they also be unfair or to the various political parties. So there's need for a truly independent election management board that can undertake that role. If it's a regulatory board that is separate, in the case of Kenya, the Office of the Registrar of Political, it should also be truly independent and should also, in its own fairness, make sure that it compels political parties and enforces all the rules, policies, or laws that are provided for every political party. I think on a level pledge. So that's one area that we need to continuously lobby for as civic society. We wish, Magnus, we endeavor to get to the level where countries like Finland, you alluded to, are as Africa. But our democracy is still growing, and but as civic society, we continue to push and we continue to want to endeavor to be there where there's transparency, where we can really scrutinize what kind of resources are being used, who is donating these resources, and where the funding is coming from. I'll also give you an example of Liberia. If I recall well, they actually have a law that does not require any political parties to receive money that is more than, I think it's 10,000, if I'm not mistaken, either 10,000, yeah, 10,000 US dollars from one individual. So the law is very clear, and what the EMB does is to make sure that political parties submit annual reports, audited accounts, so they can actually scrutinize if political parties are adhering to that specific law. But one person was also arguing that if I'm a donor, if I'm an individual, I want to donate funding, I can donate 10,000. I give my friend another 10. I give my wife another 10, my daughter, my son, and we are different individuals funding a party, and we can fund maybe 500,000, but giving different people to do it. So still there's need to continuously strengthen, to need to continuously have those checks and balances, even in the policies and the laws that we have in the different countries with regards to political parties financing, and also trying to make sure that the use of ICTs is as an emerging tool that we can use either to monitor, to scrutinize, and even to gather information, data about how political parties' finances are being used in politics and elections. I have asked the moderator if I can be excused. Thank you very much. It was very exciting. I think that will be my parting shot as well. I hope to join you again in the near future in other debates. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Ellen Dingane, for joining us and for sharing your thoughts. We appreciate your efforts and we wish you all the best in the observation in Kenya. So I want to come back to Dr. Magnus. You just had Helen sharing some of her insights on some of the things that need to be done in order to strengthen the political parties and also the candidates, so that they can be willing to declare their sources of campaigns and how much they have spent. In your own thought as an expert in this area, do you think it's very possible to have political parties and also candidates have the willingness to disclose how much money they have gotten, how much money they have spent in Africa?
Yes, I do, though not tomorrow. This is a longer term process. This is work that needs to be ongoing. And I agree completely with everything that Ellen said. And then I want to add the other side, which is what she does excellently on a day-to-day basis, which is the civil society aspect. And it's important that we don't lose track of that. To be honest, I don't think there is any African country where we can conceivably force political parties to be transparent through introducing a new law tomorrow and having an oversight body that will enforce this and that will sanction and punish parties that are not transparent. I'm not even sure I would advocate that we try. I think there's a significant risk that in trying to create transparency in democracy, we lose democracy, right? This is parties and election campaigns are essential to do the democratic process. And we must remember that. And we must remember that across African countries, we have many examples of governments trying to enforce things, but ending up losing democracy in the process. So what I want to stress is the demand side. Citizens saying, if you want to run my country, I want to know where you got your money. I want to know where those 7 helicopters, how they were paid for example. So the issue of citizens saying, we actually want to know this. We are not going to vote for you unless you tell us how that money came from. So that, I think, is an essential part of this process. We cannot only look at governments and institutions and laws, but also pressure from below, which can help change the behavior of political parties and politicians, and also help changing legislation down the line. But this needs to be demand driven and it's very long term. And part of this is also, you know what, I think many political parties in Africa, if we ask them, can you tell us how much you spent in the election campaigns? Can you give us the invoices? Their honest answer, if they wanted to be honest, is no, we don't know. Because the bookkeeping within political parties, it tends to be really bad in most African countries. If you talk to a party treasurer, he might know or she might know how much the party headquarters have spent on various things, but has no clue of what's been happening on the ground. And a lot of campaigning in many African countries is very decentralized. So another key to this is parties must also be given the assistance and to take seriously the role of actually tracking themselves how much money that they raise and spend. A lot of African parties lose a lot of money through internal corruption. So that's another issue we need to address.
Thank you so much, Dr. Omar. I want to come back to Emma. There was a question that I saw Eddie Kainda had asked about how some of the African countries, for example, governments in Africa deliberately switch off social media, which is one of the ICT tool which we use sometimes during elections. But there is just a general feeling that most governments in Africa don't fancy the usage of ICT, especially when they know that it's likely to expose them. So they tend to either switch it off or do away with it. So I want to know from you, how can we change that mindset and narrative among some of these government leaders so that they can know that one way of being transparent and also being seen as people who are responsible and want to lead their citizens in a manner that is open and transparent is by allowing such things to flourish, and so that people can get to know, okay, what are they doing here? Are they getting money from maybe outside foreigners or what? Or are they getting money from the government's resource envelope? So how can we change that narrative and perception among its government leaders and also regimes in power who have the tendency of switching off or sabotaging the ICT tools during election periods?
Thank you very much, moderator. That's a very interesting question. Yeah, the last elections we had social media, not just social media. It was the whole internet infrastructure that was actually switched off. It wasn't just social media. You couldn't do any bank transactions. You couldn't access emails. You couldn't do anything. So it's become a culture in several other African countries. But I think in Nigeria, they had Twitter switched off, I think, during elections. It was Twitter because Twitter is one of the most used in Nigeria. For Uganda, it's been Facebook up to today. It's still officially locked out. You can only access it via VPN up to today. So I think the idea of switching off internet is just the fear of governments exposing whatever is going on during election days. Scenarios where maybe people start to share DR forms on election day, and maybe somebody has a smart tool that is able to aggregate all this data and is trying to give maybe election results. But we all know that in most countries, the mandate of declaring results and aggregating results is purely that of the EMB, the election management body. But of course, individual political parties will have interests. Independent candidates will have interest in trying to see that can I be able to verify my results before even the Electoral Commission declares them. Of course, to be honest with you, I think the only way we're going to have to achieve this is either through legislation and maybe a code of conduct that once a government is coming in power, they probably will not interfere with the fourth estate. Because basically, shutting down internet is basically not recognizing the role played by media in every democracy. And I want to believe that every democracy across the world must be able to respect the role that media plays, because it shares information and brings all this information to the platform. I mean, I think Dr. Oman would definitely agree that in developed nations like his and the US, whatever criticism you receive from the people, it doesn't give you the guarantee to shut down internet. But most of African governments and democracies are young and they're growing. And I think it is definitely something that is achievable tomorrow. I wouldn't say it's achievable definitely in a couple of years, but not immediately tomorrow. I wouldn't be surprised in 2026 we still go through the similar scenario where internet is switched off. Kenya has not yet done it, but it's happened in Uganda and a couple of other democracies where internet is switched off. I think it is also the same thing that happens in Ethiopia and several other African countries. So it's not news, it happens. And it is a question of continuously civil society building a movement that continues to encourage the government to understand the role that is played by social media and to allow themselves to be open to criticisms to improve democracy through all these transparent methods. Because a credible election is only very credible when you allow transparency to be part and parcel of the whole package. So I think it requires a lot of engagement with governments, and it is not something that you're going to achieve in one day. It's going to take continuous engagement. It is going to take legislation. It's going to take sharing with other countries their experiences, but also just still on this issue of data and the legal framework. Maybe it's something we can start push through the regional bodies like the East African Commission or any of these regional bodies, that if you want to be part and part of the EAC, maybe we should start thinking about legislation at that level, that every country is required to ensure that even during a campaign, you shouldn't be able to switch off internet as a requirement from the East African body, so that we are accountable to each of the regional blocks in that perspective. So we have to think outside the box and come up with solutions and ideas that we'll be able to use to actually address this phenomenon. Yeah, thank you. And of course, just before I go off, I know some governments have signed up to this thing called the Open Government Partnership, OGP, which has components around opening up and disclosure of information and data that maybe can still be adopted even within issues to do with elections, campaign finance, and so forth. So that if you're signing up as a country, as a member of the Open Government Partnership, OGP, then you should be required to adhere to some of these instruments. So it becomes a sort of global instrument, just like the way Uganda is a signatory to several other international statutes, that is part and parcel of how a democracy should be run. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. Dr. Magnus, you've just heard from Emmanuel sharing how our African countries can try to respect and ensure that the fourth estate, which encompasses ICT, can be respected and they don't switch off internet during election periods. And we have seen that, for example, in Uganda here, in the last general election, they switched off internet on claims that it's a security measure. So according to you, as one of as an expert in the area of electoral democracy, is it really necessary for a government to switch off internet at a critical time where citizens want to access information, data, and all of those other things during an election time in the name of a security measure?
Well, there would have to be very extreme reasons for switching off communication tools between citizens. And in most scenarios and most situations where this has happened, I would argue that those conditions have not been met. And I think, like Emmanuel was saying, there are situations we can consider legislation, we can consider codes of conduct. There is another way. What if a situation where a government turns off the internet before an election and the people's response is, okay, so we're not going to vote for you. And they completely vote that party out of power. Again, that's not something that's going to happen tomorrow. There are a lot of conditions and situations. There is clientelism, there are relationships. But if we have that response, then down the line, governments will say, well, we're probably not going to do that because that's not in our interest. And if we look also in more general terms about the issue of transparency in money in politics we're talking about, if we're looking at countries in contexts where it works a bit better, because it doesn't work well anywhere. There's no country on the planet that doesn't have problems with money in politics. But where it works a bit better, it's normally not because there are strict laws. It's normally not because there is really strict enforcement and control. It's normally because politicians know that if I, for example, let's say I raise pensions shortly before an election, that doesn't actually help me because the voters don't like it. They will say, well, you are just abusing my taxpayers' money and giving it back to me. You are bribing me with my own money. And where voters don't respond to such practices, then they will stop, because no politician wants to use the 7 helicopters or spend the large amounts of money. They do it because they think they can win power that way. And they're right in many cases. But if we make them wrong, if we push from below to say this is not acceptable behavior in our society, then those activities will change. Long-term goal, but it does work.
Yeah, I want to agree with you, but it's definitely a long shot where citizens decide to say that we are not voting. But you see, I think the critical component and aspect for me, which I think basically in most African countries, is that what is the reason for voting? Because you see, if the reason for voting is based on issues and transparency and all these things, then it makes sense. But we've witnessed many times the reasons people vote here is because they're probably giving them some money, they are bribing them to vote, they're bribing people to come to political rallies, they're bribing people to do all these kind of things. And this is money you cannot, in a way, be able to have credible data sources to actually allude to in campaign financing. I mean, at the end of the day, some of these things are done behind closed doors. You may take a video and share it on social media and say, hey guys, so and so has been bribing people here and there, but that's it. You cannot tell how much money has actually been spent in that occasion and how much has been spent bribing all the different citizens across the country, because it's practically not part and parcel of the technology framework. This is a manual process. But maybe continuously, as African countries adopt digital transactions of money, then we will start to see a difference. Because if most of our transactions are done manually, I come with a bag full of money to buy anything or a car, then it continuously becomes difficult. But probably as we continue to push African economies to adopt digital technologies in terms of payments and maybe bank transfers, point of sale points where you can just swap your ATMs for any purchases that you're doing. The use of mobile money, of course, which has now become a big thing in Africa. So maybe then we can start to be able to actually speak to how much money is being spent in all these processes. But as long as we continue to use hard cash currency in the campaigns, it's really difficult. But as we continue to push for adopting of practices, it's not even legislation. It's pushing an economy to adopt practices that include using digital transfer of money, because then you're also able to cut down on corruption and all this illicit financing that happens. You then have a sort of a database to look at the flow of money, where it's coming from. Because even when you look at things like crowdfunding, whichever technology platform that you use, it's not really highly used in most of the African countries, even by political parties, to actually raise money. I think the last campaign I saw, either one of the opposition political parties share phone numbers to receive cash from people who are interested, but you can't tell how much money they are receiving throughout the day. You cannot speak to it. You just know, okay, yes, there is a phone number they're using to receive money, but you cannot actually tell how much they have done that. Of course, you need a court order for you to know the transactions that have gone on that particular phone number. And it's not public knowledge. And neither will the political party be willing to say, yes, through this framework of this phone number that we share, this is the amount of money that we have done received. So I think it's still work in progress. There are several strategies that can be adopted, but I think we're still at the initial stages, and there are definitely tools and strategies on how best that can be done. Abel, welcome back. You had left us alone.
No, I had some connectivity challenges, so I had to maneuver and come back. So thanks for waiting. There was a question Felix asked. I don't know whether it was responded to. It was from Felix. But I don't know whether you can flash it back so that Dr. Magnus can respond to it. That beyond regulation and can be put in place to encourage transparency in political party funding.
Yeah, I would simply go to what we have been discussing a lot, which is pressure from below. And I think that's especially important in African societies. This discussion we're having right now is part of that process of pushing for reform. And again, I think legal reform, formal oversight, the involvement of the police and courts, all of that is incredibly important. And I spend a lot of my time working on those things. But I really also want to stress, and I can't stress that enough, the role of media and the role of civil society. Emmanuel makes an incredibly important point just now about why people vote. And I think that if we don't address that, then we can't really get to the problem of why it's important how money is raised and spent. But if we are engaging citizens in a dialogue of what does democracy mean for us in a society, in wherever we are in Africa or anywhere else, what is the long-term impact of that? What is the importance, not just for us, but for our children and our grandchildren, long-term development of our societies? To gradually change the thing that if I receive some money today and I vote in a certain way, that gives me a benefit today. But it hurts my country and my children, my grandchildren down decades down the line. So the role of civil society there is incredibly important. The organization I work for, IFES, the International Foundation for Electoral System, is in the process of delivering a guide, of publishing a guide on the civil society experience of monitoring campaign finance. And that draws on the experience from groups across the world, including countries like Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda, Ghana, and of course, ZESEN that we just heard from in Zimbabwe, from Ellen. But that handbook deals with a lot of these issues, a lot of these complications, and the use of ICT by civil society as well, which is another issue we mustn't forget.
Thank you. We have come really to the tail end of this webinar series, so I would like each of us to give their concluding remarks, and we end today's webinar series. I will start with you, Emmanuel.
Yeah, thank you very much, Abel and ACFIM, for inviting me to be part of this very important discussion on the role of ICT in enhancing electoral financing. I think definitely technology is a growing trend across the world, not just in Africa. And many technology tools will keep coming, and just to enhance issues to do with transparency and so forth. I mean, yes, you mentioned things like Bitcoins and all these other frameworks and all the emerging technologies that are coming through, the importance of artificial intelligence in as far as democracy is concerned. I think each of these are definitely areas that are very important to citizens. And like I've mentioned, and the way Dr. Magnus has also emphasized, it's very imperative that the citizens know why they are voting. So as civil society and as part and parcel of the civil society framework, it is very important that the civic duty to encourage citizens to know the reason they vote and why they vote and why they have to hold their leaders accountable is something that is very critical. That even when campaigns are going on and when people are promising to take leadership of the country, there has to be a social contract that when you become my president, when you become my member of parliament, when you become my LC1 chairperson in my village, these are my expectations. This is the standard of behavior and integrity that I expect of you as a leader. This sort of accountability, even with the resources that you're using for campaigns, are issues that are important to me. So if citizens can get to understand that, then I think it becomes easier for technology to now play the role it is supposed to play, because the data sets and the information will be there, and that information will be able to enhance transparency and combat issues of using a lot of these monies within political finance that we cannot assess where it's coming from. And eventually you notice that every time we finish an election in Uganda, we actually have an inflation. You know, the cost of living goes way too high and so forth. It takes almost 2 years before an economy recovers from that. Then again, in 2-3 years, you're back to the same trajectory and the same sort of trend. Yeah, thank you very much. And I appreciate, I look forward to the next discussion. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. Lastly, we go to Dr. Magnus Hoffman.
Well, thank you, Abel. And I think Emmanuel has emphasized the key points. The main thing is to build this pressure and this demand and the social contract between those who lead our country or our locality and the people. And ICT has a potentially important role in building this transparency. But we need to look at small steps. We need to look at what can be done gradually, what needs to happen in which order. Forget ICT doesn't have any role on its own. It's a tool for us to use in building transparency. And that's something that we need to then use as a gradual enforcement, and we need to gradually at each step also evaluate how this process works. Look out for unintended consequences, because they will happen, but slowly we can build a long-term increase in transparency. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hoffman and Emmanuel, and also Ellen who left us. It has been awesome having all of you discussing this interesting topic. I want to also thank those who have been following us from wherever you have been. This webinar series runs every last Thursday of every month. At the end of every last Thursday of every month, we always have Money in Politics webinar series, which is brought to you by Alliance Finance Monitoring ACFIM, which is a political finance watchdog in Africa. My name is Abel Esero, and I've been stepping in for Mr. Felix Kafuma, who is the moderator of this webinar series. I want to thank all those who have been following us, and also appreciate all the panelists who have been with us today. Thank you so much, and God bless you all.
Thank you.
One of the major challenges related to money in politics is the lack of transparency surrounding political party and election finance. Open and transparent funding of political parties and candidates is desirable because it helps to ensure everyone is playing by the rules. This in turn strengthens the integrity of and trust in politics of the general public and political parties in Africa. Transparency helps to level the playing field, exposes the risk of undue influence over politicians, and helps protect against the infiltration of illicit sources of money, thus contributing to the broader fight against corruption. In recent years, there has been considerable progress in the use of information technology to enhance transparency in financing political parties and election campaigns. The rapid digitalization of government agencies, political parties, and citizens alike has significantly expanded the potential to use digital tools to enhance transparency. Use of technology, including digital tools such as websites, programs, and online resources, can help provide solutions towards addressing undeclared, undisclosed, and/or dirty money in politics. When a country builds an online reporting and disclosure system, it becomes part of a wider societal effort to protect and enhance the integrity of politics. In this 8th webinar series on money in politics in Africa, we interrogate the role of ICT in political finance reporting and disclosure.